very tumultuous year, 2020 did offer the world a glimpse of hope for the Middle East. On August 13th, 2020, the Abraham Accords statement was signed between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel, marking the first public normalization of relations between an Arab country and Israel since Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994. Now, there are hints of a possible start to a Saudi and Israeli relationship. While the plight of the Palestinian people remains a crucial and unanswered aspect of this very old conflict, are we closer to a prospect of Middle East peace? Good morning and welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. I'm Liz Brailsford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Our program today features His Excellency Ayman Safadi, Deputy Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of Jordan. He is joined in conversation with Joanne Cummings, who is a recently retired career Foreign Service officer with the State Department and adjunct professor at Baylor University. She served many years in the Middle East and North Africa, and thus I am very much looking forward to her discussion with His Excellency on a path to peace in the Middle East, rather. We have a full schedule of virtual programs, so remember to check out our website at dfwworld.org for newly scheduled events. And now join me in recognizing Baylor University for its continued partnership and support of this series. I would like to remind everyone that you too can sponsor a program for $500 or $1,000 and to get in touch with Alana Buenrostro at 956-466-1149 about sponsorship opportunities. And here is Steve Gardner, Professor and Director of the McBride Center for International Business at Baylor, who will introduce our guests. Thank you, Steve, truly for your wonderful support through these months. We are really grateful for that. And now I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Liz. It's been a real pleasure. We at Baylor are just so pleased to be working with the World Affairs Council on this year's Global Business Forum. And our program today represents a particularly high level of cooperation between the Council, Baylor University, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I know that we have many distinguished guests in our virtual audience today, but I'll mention only one. Her Excellency Dina Kawar, the Ambassador to the United States of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, is joining us today from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Ambassador Kawar. When the opportunity presents itself, we would love to have you visit the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth and Baylor University. And now, as you know, our special guest this morning joins us from Amman, Jordan. His Excellency, Dr. Ayman Safadi, has served as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates for the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan since 2017, and also as Deputy Prime Minister since last October. He works tirelessly to serve the needs of citizens and expatriates in Jordan and to advance the peace process in the Middle East. During the past week alone, I know that he has met with foreign ministers and other officials of China, Egypt, France, and Germany. His Excellency had a long and distinguished career in journalism and broadcasting as a correspondent, editor, and executive in Jordan and abroad. In previous public appointments, he served as Director of Media for the Royal Court, advisor to King Abdullah, Minister of State, a member of the Senate, spokesperson for the Jordanian government, and a spokesperson for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Iraq. His Excellency earned his undergraduate degree at Yarmouk University in Jordan, but I am very proud to say that he earned his Master's of International Journalism at Baylor University in 1992, and we've had a wonderful relationship ever since that time. Welcome back to Texas, my dear friend. Our moderator this morning, as you've heard, is eminently qualified to handle this task. Joanne Hilt Cummings was raised in the Middle East in a State Department family, completed her undergraduate work at the American University in Beirut and her master's at UT Austin, and served throughout the Middle East as a foreign service officer for the State Department until her retirement last year. Now, I'm happy to say that Joanne is teaching in the political science department at Baylor University. So thank you, Your Excellency, and Joanne, and all of you for joining us today. Joanne, I hand the program to you.
Thank you very much, Steve and Liz, and Your Excellency. It is absolutely wonderful to see you again. I have enjoyed our many conversations over the last decade or so in several different contexts, and I know that our audience today is going to benefit enormously from what you have to say. Before I raise questions for you, I'd like to open the floor for you to make whatever introductory statement you choose to do.
Thank you so much. Good morning to you all, and I'm grateful to Baylor University Global Business Forum and the World Affairs Council Dallas-Fort Worth for this opportunity. Dear old friend, Dr. Gardner, my old friend and professor, Ms. Cummings, who's also a dear colleague and a friend for a long time, and Ms. Brailsford, thank you so much. I would have loved to be with you in person, to be back in Texas, but it is COVID and the implications that we all know. Unfortunately, COVID has disrupted all our lives and has also shown how interdependent we are. And I'm speaking to you now at a time when we're facing a big challenge with COVID as a number of cases continue to increase. Positivity rate is about 20% compared to this time last year, when we were able to control very effectively the first wave of the pandemic. That we did, though, through strict measures, including a 2-week lockdown. Unfortunately, we do not have the resources to go to such strict measures anymore. The impact on the economy has been devastating. So what we're trying to do now is to find a balance between doing everything we can in terms of minimize the spread of the pandemic, emphasizing the need for wearing of masks, social distancing, and also try to encourage people to get the vaccine and continue to try and acquire the amount of the vaccine we need given the global disruption of supply. Tough times in the region. As we battle COVID, we continue with our historical role in Jordan in terms of trying to create an environment of peace, overcome the many challenges that have affected this region for so long and have impacted on our ability to achieve the levels of development that we want, create peace, stability, and ultimately opportunity that would benefit the hundreds of millions of young people whose potentials has yet to be tapped, given the lack of peace and stability in the region. Jordan has always prided itself in being a force for peace, a force for moderation in this part of the world. His Majesty King Abdullah has made the achievement of this peace and overcoming the regional crisis a priority for Jordan, and therefore we continue to employ every resource available that we have in our efforts to overcome regional crises. And that we do in solid partnership with the United States of America, a historical partner, a strong partnership that has done a lot of good, not only for both our countries, but also for the region and for the cause of peace and stability through decades of friendship and close cooperation. And allow me to say that we continue to be grateful to the United States for the support that it has continued to provide Jordan over many decades. That support is key to us in Jordan as we try to introduce economic reforms and therefore improve the efficiency and performance of our economy. That support is also key in efforts to bring about peace and stability in the region, for the U.S. has a leading role that it cannot be dispensed with. We need the U.S. to be active. We need the U.S. to be involved, and the U.S. can count on Jordan as a solid partner in the pursuit of our common goals. That said, unfortunately, the challenges in the regions are far too many. Back to the days of Baylor 30 years ago, if we compare it to what we have now, I think we were way better off in many ways. So the challenges continue to grow, but so do our efforts to solve them increase. The major conflict, the major cause of instability in the region has been the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Achieving Palestinian-Israeli peace on basis that would address the legitimate concerns of both peoples and usher in an era of cooperation is something that has been a priority for Jordan. That said, however, the peace process continues to face extremely big challenges. The two-state solution remains the only solution that we believe will bring about the comprehensive peace that we all want. That solution is being challenged, unfortunately, by unilateral measures that are undermining its viability, building of settlements, expansion of settlements, slower efforts and lesser commitment to move on the peace track through direct, meaningful negotiations is also a factor. What we're trying to do at this point is reinvigorate the peace process, bring the parties back to the table with a view to achieving a comprehensive peace, whose only path, we believe, and so does the majority of the world, again, is the two-state solution that would allow for the emergence of a viable, independent Palestinian state on the June 1967 lines with East Jerusalem as capital, living by side a secure and safe Israel, per international law and per the Arab Peace Initiative, which continues to be the most comprehensive effort yet to achieve that comprehensive peace. Again, as Ms. Cummings mentioned at the beginning, Ms. Les, I believe, that we've had a peace treaty with Israel since 27 years. Our commitment to peace remains unwavering, but we do know the region, we live in the region, and we know that unless we solve the core issue, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it's going to be extremely difficult to get to that peace, if not entirely impossible. It is not because of the absence of peace treaties between Arab states and Israel that we have a conflict. It is because we have the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that we have not had such peace treaties. Bottom line is, nobody is doing anybody a favor by opting for peace. We all need to work for it. Everybody in the region, all peoples of the region deserve and need this peace. What we need to do now is regroup our efforts, focus back on getting the parties back to the table and move towards the two-state solution, because frankly, if we lose the two-state solution, the only option that remains out there is a one-state reality. And if we go to a one-state reality, the big question that the whole world is going to have to face, is it going to be a democracy or is it going to be apartheid? So I think now is the time to move forward. We're looking forward to engaging with the new United States administration. The signs that have come out of it so far are extremely positive. We are doing the heavy lifting in the region, trying to make sure that we do have, again, an environment that would enable the resumption of meaningful negotiations so that we can move forward. Other challenges in the region remain very devastating. To be honest, the Syrian crisis has just entered its 10th year. 10 years into that crisis, we've seen millions of people displaced, millions of kids of school-going age being deprived of their basic right to education. Country is destroyed, and it is time, we believe, to pause, reassess, and again, exert all the necessary effort to make sure that we find a political solution to this crisis and end this humanitarian catastrophe. Refugees has been one of the ugly harvest of this crisis. In Jordan alone, we have about 1.3 million Syrians. 48% of these are under the age of 15, which means the only country that they've really known is Jordan. We try to do our best. We provide refugees the same treatment we provide our citizens despite the economic challenges. We've given about 272,000 work permits to Syrians at a time when unemployment in Jordan is about 24%. And that number is almost 5 times the number of the jobs that our economy can create on an annual basis. About 154,000 Syrian kids go to our schools, which also has been a tremendous burden, so that about 200 schools in Jordan now are applying the double shift program. We are committed to doing everything we can to provide refugees with the decent, dignified life that they want, not only out of altruism and not because Jordanians have always been welcoming of refugees, but because they are in the room and they must be happy. If we invest in refugees, give them a dignified, decent life, they'll be the new generation that will rebuild their country. If we abandon them to ignorance, hate, bitterness, need, there will be a pool from which every radical extremist group will try to recruit. So that is a huge challenge. That is an investment in our collective security, with the crisis having shown how interdependent our security is. That said, however, refugees cannot be the responsibility of host countries alone. It's a global responsibility. While we thank all our partners for the tremendous support they provided, I have to raise the alarm that support is dwindling, not just to host countries, but to UN organizations. World Food Programme has just informed us that they're suffering a tremendous cut in funding that would impact its ability to provide the refugees with the services that they need. Refugees are not going to go back until the crisis is solved. We are seeing that firsthand in Jordan. Nobody is going back until they feel they can go back to an environment where they can feed their kids, provide them with education and medical treatment, among other vital services. Tension in the Gulf is also key. We believe that the region has its share of crisis. It does not need any more crises. The path to ending that tension is really for Iran to change its policies in the region. It's not just the nuclear issue, it is also the issue of intervention and the affairs of the Arab states. What we say is that we want good relations with Iran based on good neighborly relations, based on the international concept of non-interference in the affairs of the other, so that we can all cooperate to bettering the lives of all our people. Terrorism remains a potent threat. Daesh has been defeated, as His Majesty keeps saying, but not destroyed. To destroy it, it's not enough to defeat it militarily. We need to also cooperate security-wise to make sure it cannot inflict any more damage on all of us. And most importantly, we need to counter the ideology of hate that they continue to propagate. And this is a responsibility on us in the region. It is us who need to come out strongly and say, those terrorists do not represent us, do not represent our faith, indeed do not represent any faith. They are outside our common humanity, and therefore they're a common threat that we must tackle by working together. And again, the US is playing the leading role in the coalition to combat ISIS, and we continue to work very, very closely with each other. I can go on and address many other issues, but I think you get the idea of how challenging the situation is. Again, key is it is in everybody's interest that we all come together to address these crises effectively, so that we replace conflict with opportunity, despair with hope. We do need an industry of hope in this region, because if we again lose people to despair and anger, then given that radicals are trying to regroup, that will be the environment in which they'll be able to rebuild themselves and prey on that hopelessness and that despair. We need each other. We need to continue to work with each other. Ours is a region of great potential. Millions of our people are under the age of 30. There's a huge number of young people who have proven their ability, who have excelled in so many aspects of life. So yes, the story of the Middle East is one, unfortunately, thus far of conflict and sadness, but it can be a story of achievement. It can be a story of progress. But that means that we need to work harder on solving those challenges and create the opportunity that all our peoples need. Again, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to engaging with you all in a conversation that will address these issues and any other issues that you feel are important. And again, I want to note that we have our very able ambassador joining us here, and I hope that the conversation will also continue and will be renewed once again. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for those highly informative and hopeful comments, Your Excellency. I know that people are going to have many questions for you on some of the issues you raised, from Jordan's relationship with the Gulf and the role of Iran and how to effectively combat Daesh. But I'd like to dive directly into what you started with, which is the peace process and the core element of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute in regional dynamics. What are the options at the moment? Do you feel that the Abraham Accords, which have focused on normalization between Israel and certain Gulf countries, are a way of moving the ball forward, or are they distracting from the core issue of the Palestinians and addressing that ongoing problem? What is your view, sir?
Thank you. As I said, comprehensive peace is a long-standing goal of Jordan. Ultimately, the Arab Peace Initiative, which was adopted in the year 2002, has put on the table a comprehensive peace that would result in Israel having peace treaties with all Arab countries. And the key to that was resolving the core issue again, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The direct answer to your question is really, it depends. If Israel sees in them an incentive to go ahead with efforts to resolve the core issue, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, on the basis of the two-state solution, then that will be really a tremendously important push to move forward. If it sees them as an alternative to solving the core issue and to jump over the core issue, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, then I'm afraid to say not just those recent peace treaties, but all the peace treaties, including that between Egypt and Israel and Jordan and Israel, will not solve the issue, and the conflict will only deepen. The reality is Palestinian Israelis are waking up in the morning and they are within kilometers or hundreds of meters from each other. GDP per capita in Israel is $39,000 compared to under $3,000 for Palestinians. This is not a status quo that can be maintained. Again, ultimately, everybody needs peace. What we have been working on is to get the parties back to the table. And as Dr. Garner just mentioned, I just came back from Paris, where we had a meeting of the Munich group, which groups together Jordan, Egypt, Germany, France, the EU, and the UN. The whole purpose of that meeting is to create political horizons, see how we can get the parties back to the table, encourage the environment that would move us further on the path towards the comprehensive peace that we all seek and want and need. And ultimately, as we do that, mitigate against measures that are rendering that solution unviable. Settlement building, to quote the late Prime Minister Rabin, is a cancer that cannot continue. The Land for Peace formula is the formula upon which the whole peace process was launched in Madrid back in the early 90s. So I think we need to be realistic. We need to face the challenge head on and say, look, Palestinians, Israelis, indeed all peoples of the region need to live in peace. To do that, we need to address the legitimate concerns of all. Palestinians' need for independence and sovereignty, Israel's need to security. If we all move from the point of departure that we need to get to a solution that works so that the region can enjoy the peace that has been denied for so long, then we need to go back to discussing how do we get to the two-state solution, because ultimately there are no options. It's either that or a conflict continuing, a conflict deepening, and therefore, unfortunately, ultimately, a conflict erupting in ways that we've seen how bad they were in the past. And that's something that, again, in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, we do not want to see happen. And hence is the continued efforts led by His Majesty to make sure that we create political horizons, we address issues right on. And when we speak as Jordan, again, we speak with the credibility of a peacemaker. We've had a peace treaty for 27 years. We protected, upheld that treaty against all odds, because we do believe that there is no alternative to peace.
Thank you. It's interesting that several of our questions thus far have been looking at aspects of the peace process from the possibility of dividing Palestine between land going to Jordan, land going to Egypt, land going to Israel, on the one hand, as opposed to unifying Palestinian territory by finding some other solution for the settlements and creating pathways between uh, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Do you think that these formulae are most important, or do you think that a fundamental desire to find a resolution is what's lacking? And if so, on which sides?
Well, again, I don't want to. I don't want to start sort of apportioning blame here. What I want to say is that the status quo is untenable. We cannot continue with it because it simply does not address the core issues of conflict. Again, Palestinians want their state. They want their right to self-determination fulfilled. The majority of the world has agreed that the two-state solution is the only way to go forward. There's simply no alternative. The whole peace process since Madrid has been based on the land for peace formula, something that Israeli leadership has agreed to, and hence we saw the Oslo Accords, which should have resulted in a Palestinian state in 5 years after its signature. So that said, again, we need to go back to the basics. The basics is that you have a people, Palestinian people, who want their national identity realized, their political identity respected, their right to freedom and statehood upheld. You have Israel, who in the past cited security concerns. You have an Arab world who's saying we're looking in partnership with the whole world to address those security concerns in the most convincing and effective manner. By the end of the day, peace, for it to last, needs to be embraced by people. And for people to embrace peace, they need to feel that they got a fair deal. It can be a win-win. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. The win-win is that Palestinians living safety with dignity, independence in their own state, per international law, Israelis living in Israel with security and acceptance in the region as well. This is the formula. Anything other than that is simply not going to be accepted by the people. It doesn't have the makings for success, and it will not solve the conflict. It will be a diversion that will only result in deepening the conflict. Now, you need commitment. You need, the point of departure must be is that the goal is peace, and the path to this peace is the two-state solution. We have seen, unfortunately, statements by the current Israeli government who does not commit to the two-state solution, who has been announcing its intention to confiscate land. And as lately as yesterday, I think, the Israeli Prime Minister said the only reason he's not confiscating is because the United States has not given its approval yet. The United States traditionally, historically, has worked and believed in the two-state solution as well. So let's get back to the basics. Let's just accept that no peace is going to be lasting, no peace is going to be effective unless it addresses the legitimate concerns of both parties. We in the Arab world are willing to do all that is required to assure Israelis that their security will be guaranteed. Israeli government, on the other hand, needs to work effectively to bring about the political horizon and engage in negotiations that would result in a Palestinian state. And it needs to stop measures that are really undermining the viability of the two-state solution: demolition of houses, building of settlements, expanding of settlements, again, confiscation of land, and one other issue, the Christian and holy sites in Jerusalem. His Majesty has been the custodian of those sites. It is a historical custodianship that goes back to his great-great-grandfather. What we try to do in Jordan is to preserve the status quo of those holy sites, make sure that we preserve their Arab, Christian, Muslim identity, so that we preserve Jerusalem and what it stands for as a city of peace. We cannot hide our heads in the sand. We know what the path to this peace is. Again, there's no time to waste. We're running out of time. We need to go back to the negotiation table on the basis of agreed and accepted terms of reference and parameters, and assure both peoples and the region and the world indeed that peace is realizable, and that the effort and commitment needed to bring it about are there as well.
Well, that's That's a very full response, and I thank you for that, sir. I know that the challenge that Jordan has faced has been uh, partly related to the sequential flows of Palestinian refugees who have been expelled and from 1948 on have found a home in Jordan. Without going into the complexities within Jordan that has created, I'd like to stay on the issue of refugees and shift our focus towards Syria. You mentioned Syria as one of the regional dynamics, and of course there are hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees inside Jordan. How do you see the role of Jordan in helping to resolve conditions in Syria? You spoke of the need with the Israelis and Palestinians to find a legitimate solution that recognizes the needs of the different communities. Is that possible in Syria? We have to believe that there's a future, but how do you get there? What is your view, Your Excellency?
It has to be possible, Joanne, because again, 10 years into that crisis, what has it achieved? Again, a country destroyed, millions of people displaced, children being denied their basic right to education, to health services, terrorism thriving. A terrorist state was built before it was defeated, but again, terrorists are still trying to regroup. In Jordan, unfortunately, to be quite honest, we've been at the receiving end of every crisis in the region. From the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to the conflict in Iraq in the years past to Syria now. We have 367 kilometers of border with Syria. Not only has the challenge been having to host 1.3 million Syrians, only 665,000 of them are registered with UNHCR, spread all over the country. Only 10% of them living in refugee camps. The rest are in every town, city, village in Jordan. So the impact on us has been tremendous. And hence, our efforts to resolve the conflict have not stopped as well in working with our partners, the United States, the European Union, our brethren in the region, and also with Russia, which has a key role in the Syrian crisis. It is there on the ground. So we've been trying to work with all of these. We are part of a small group that groups, in addition to Jordan, the US, the UK, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. We also attend Astana as observer. So we're everywhere trying to, again, bring focus back to the crisis. And unfortunately, we have not had a strategy globally on Syria in the past few years. It's been ad hoc management of certain flare-ups of conflict here and there. Few people are, to be honest, are talking about Syria and the Syrian now. Syria has become a battleground for regional international powers fighting each other out. Terrorism has become a major aspect of the equation there. So we continue to work for a peaceful settlement that would, again, preserve unity, integrity of Syria, restore to it its safety, security, and stability, ensures the enduring defeat of terrorist forces, result in the departure of all foreign troops from it, and create conditions conducive for the return, voluntarily return, I must say, of refugees to Syria. We cannot do it alone. We need to all be together. And right now we're in conversation with our partners in the US, our partners in Europe, other countries in the region, and Russia and others to see how we can regalvanize efforts to bring about an end to this conflict. At the same time, the humanitarian issue is of major concern. We need to also figure out a way that would allow to ensure that people do get the humanitarian support that they need. So we're working with the UN as well. To us in Jordan, the threat from Syria crisis continuing has been, as I said, enormous, not only in terms, by the way, of the flow of refugees into Jordan who are not going back, and the pressure that is putting on our educational, health, and other key sectors. We have, as I said, 367 borders of kilometers of border with Syria. We lost people to terrorist attacks that came out of Syria. We aborted many more others. Now we're facing the new challenge of drug trafficking as chemical drugs are being manufactured in Syria, and attempts to smuggle them to Jordan and through Jordan to the region and to Europe are continuing as well. We also had a major impact on our economy. Border towns that, as is the case with border town all over, have lost a mainstay of their economy. Also, our route to Europe in terms of land transport has been disrupted, so the cost of imports, exports have increased as well. So again, Syria cannot continue. It's a crisis, it's a catastrophe whose biggest victim has been innocent people. That has got to stop. This is our message to the world, and this is what we're working with all our partners to achieve.
Thank you, Your Excellency. As we look at Syria, the focus is obviously on the destruction that is still occurring and on the humanitarian disaster that continues to unfold. However, part of what you're talking about in terms of regaining transportation access to Europe and the rest has to do with reconstruction in Syria, which implies some level of normalization, but with whom? It seems that Iran and Russia, who both play a role in Syria, have an interest in the international community providing reconstruction funds, particularly if President Assad is able to stay in power. How do you see that dynamic?
The global position thus far, whether in Europe or the US, is that reconstruction will have to be linked to progress in the political process. So no reconstruction before convincing, meaningful movement in the political process, in accordance with UN Resolution 2254, which has received the consensus of all members of the Security Council and which has become a term of reference for moving forward. That said, however, we're trying in Jordan to make a distinction between reconstruction and what we call stabilization. Others call early recovery. Call it whatever you want, but the goal of it is to make sure that we do not punish the people further for the conflict of which they are victims. We cannot victimize them again. What we've been trying to do is to push the argument that we do provide humanitarian support. We partner with UN organizations that are there on the ground. And the question is, Joanne, really is that if you have 1,000 Syrian kids, whether they're growing under regime-controlled areas or opposition-controlled areas, if you do not provide them again with schools and a decent life, what will they grow up to be? Ignorance is the best ally of radicalization and extremism. And if ignorance is combined with frustration, hopelessness, indignity, then you're talking about the making of the perfect storm here. So ultimately, we need to really be realistic, be pragmatic, and say the ultimate goal is to solve the political crisis. That must be the focus of all our efforts. But as we get there, do we minimize the impact that will be long-lasting, or do we ignore all of that and just say all or nothing? There's a lot of gray areas there. We believe in Jordan that humans must be at the core of everything that we do. Helping people, saving innocent people is and should be at the core of what we do. And this is the argument that we're pushing. Ultimately, we spoke of a lot of threats in the region. One of the biggest threats that nobody even mentions is that in the Arab world now, whether in Syria or in Yemen or in Libya or in many of the other hotspots, you have about 12 million kids of school-going age that are not going to school. This is a long-term challenge. that we cannot just turn our eyes away from. We need to have a holistic approach to the problem, factor in what the priorities are, and minimize damage as we try to go for the ultimate answer to all those problems.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I know that Jordan has always taken a very strong forward-looking stand on education and the development of human capital, which speaks well to both kings' perspectives, but also I think highlights what you're saying about the problem in the region as a whole. Before I go into questions that I haven't already woven into my own, I'd like to ask you just on the last point you raised, which was on Iran, relationships with Iran and what is needed to see from Iran. You may not know that I lived in Iran. I went to high school there. So I do tend to have a fairly nuanced view of the country. And yet it is easy to be very frustrated with Iran's actions in the Middle East at this time because of their support for proxy groups, because of their support for the Assad regime. So how do we balance perhaps an understanding that Iran sees itself to be under threat with a perception everywhere else that Iran constitutes part of the threat?
Look, again, we do want very good relations with Iran and everybody else in the region. As I said, we have more than our fair share of crises in this part of the world. So we really do not want more. And an eruption of the tension with Iran in a violent way would have a devastating impact, not just on the region, but on globally as well, because of the centrality and the strategic importance of that Gulf region in terms of supply of oil and others. But we need to ask ourselves, why is it that we have a problem with Iran? And let's have, again, sort of a stock taking of everything. It is not Arab countries that are interfering in the affairs of Iran. It's not Arab countries that are supporting groups inside Iran. It's not Arab countries that are moving in with a view to influencing how things move in Iran. And it's not Arab countries who are trying to export any ideology into Iran. There are three aspects to the challenge with Iran now. One is the nuclear issue, and that's a global concern. And now we're all seeing the efforts by the new administration to re-engage with a view to making sure that Iran commits to the JCPOA. So that's one factor. Second factor is traditional missiles development and the potential danger inherent therein. And third is interventionist policies, whether in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and in other places as well. What we say is that we want to have a comprehensive dialogue that will provide answers to all those challenges. And ultimately, we overcome them, and ultimately, we all focus again on creating an environment of peace and cooperation, so that instead of having tension in the Gulf, we have an environment that would allow for development and for commerce and for the creation of opportunity. So that is the impact. Iran is a key country in the region. Iran is part of the region. What we want is to create conditions that would take us towards a relationship, again, based on cooperation rather than conflict. So we must put all that on the table, and we must, again, engage in dialogue that would get us there. Everything in the region is interconnected, as you know very well. And I think if you look at Syria, you look at Yemen, you look at Lebanon, you look at even Gaza, you will see a common thread there, which is Iran's role and presence. And again, we don't want to go to war with Iran. We don't want to have conflict with Iran. What we want is to responsibly address those issues and end negative intervention that is feeding conflict and at times obstructing the resolutions of conflict as well.
Thank you. And I do hear the thread in all of your comments of a fundamental concern for people, that if you address the needs of people, the political and economic constructs become more clear. So thank you for that. I would like to raise, and I'm going to raise several together of questions that have been asked so that you can weave together your response as you choose. So one is, how is Algeria as a large country viewed in Jordan, and what kinds of cooperation exist between Jordan and Algeria? In addition, does the COVID crisis, in an odd way, offer some unique windows and pathways to reset the peace process? And on the line of the peace process, would a two-state solution, how would a two-state solution address Palestinian right of return? The Israelis obviously feel that that would be totally destructive of the what they consider the core nature of Israel. Palestinians feel that they have a fundamental right to return home. So would you like to deal with those either separately, or if you can find a linkage?
Sure, absolutely. Again, Algiers is a very important country. It is going through an important transition at this point with a new constitution, new elections, and they're moving forward. Algiers is not probably a part of the Arab East, but it's part of the Maghreb. And it's a country with a lot of potential, a lot of resources. Now it is moving again in a process of political reforms that are key. We have good cooperation with them in terms of educational exchanges. We're both members of the Arab League. We're both members of the OIC, members of those regional fora that allow for engagement. And we do want to continue to engage with Algiers in a way that could create economic and other kind of cooperation in a way that would reflect positively on us and also on the region. One of the challenges that this region faces is that quite often you do not have the regional cooperation mechanism that will maximize value. And we need to revisit that and create interdependence through institutional cooperation. Remember, the EU was built on an economic interdependence to start with. We need to do more of the same in the Arab world. We need to know how to neutralize differences. It's not all or nothing. Countries could disagree on one thing, but they could cooperate on a whole host of issues where they have common value and common interest as well. So I think part of building institutional regional cooperation mechanisms is key to all of us addressing many issues, including COVID. I mean, COVID, as we all have learned by now, it showed again how vulnerable we are, how interdependent we are. The virus is not going to stop at borders. You can vaccinate a country. If you do not vaccinate the neighboring country, then it will come back. So His Majesty has been speaking of regional pact, whereby, like you did in the states came together and worked out a sort of joint policy. We need to do the same in the region, because quite often, as you know very well, the distance between states and the region is much shorter than the distance between states within the United States of America. That is reality. The sad part of reality is that those mechanisms of cooperation do not exist. So COVID could be an opportunity, is an opportunity for all of us to again depoliticize this pandemic, throw politics out of the window in dealing with this issue, and do what's right for all of us, for all our people. So cooperating on fighting the pandemic, on vaccination, on long-term investment in science and technology so that the region can be part of the creation of the solution in terms of science. And in relation to the West Bank and Israel, we did criticize Israel initially for having vaccinated its people and not having vaccinated Palestinians who live under its occupation. And that just does not make sense, because, you know, I mean, again, you're talking about so closely linked communities out there. So that is a must. And in Munich Group, we've been raising the need for confidence building measures between the Palestinians and Israelis, and COVID would be the great opportunity to do that, because again, the virus is not going to discriminate between Palestinians and Israelis. So that's an area where I feel we could have an opportunity and we can move forward with. And we in Jordan certainly encourage that. And we believe that this is, all cooperation can always create confidence. It can always be a factor in enabling an environment of trust, because the absence of trust is one of the challenges that face efforts to bring about peace and stability in the region. In relation to the last question and the two-state solution, look, refugees is a final status issue. In Oslo, the Palestinians and Israelis agreed that this will be addressed through dialogue as part of the final status issues. The Arab Peace Initiative itself speaks of an agreed-to solution to the refugees issue. And Palestinians and Israelis have engaged in such conversation in the past, and then they agreed on the principle, but then working out the details proved challenging, and then the whole peace effort collapsed. So I think we can find a solution to the refugees that address their legitimate right to return and compensation per international law and Resolution 194. But again, put it on the table in an environment of commitment to finding a solution. We do believe that we can address this as part of the final status issues, and the parties, with the help of all of us in the international community, can ensure that we find a solution that works. As I said, ultimately, you need to have a solution that addresses the legitimate concerns of both parties. That is what brings about the real lasting peace that we want.
I know that His Majesty has frequently over the years spoken very eloquently about exactly that issue. And tied to those final status issues is the status of Jerusalem. President Trump took a step that was part of his broader view of the Abraham Accords of recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, to outcry from many in the Arab world, with the argument that that prejudged final status discussions and negotiations. That is one question that has been raised for you. Another is, does the difference between Sunni and Shi'i Muslims in the region affect peace, affect the goal of peace, reaching peace in the Middle East?
Thank you. On the issue of Jerusalem, our position in Jordan has always been that East Jerusalem should be the capital of the Palestinian state that should emerge under the two-state solution through negotiations as the only way to achieving the just and lasting peace. As I said, we are strong partners with the United States. We have a strategic partnership, and that allows also for a frank and open conversation among friends. And when the U.S. took the decision to recognize Jerusalem as capital of Israel and move the embassy to Jerusalem, we disagreed with them on that, and we spoke very openly. And the former Vice President Pence, after visiting Amman and meeting with His Majesty, he gave a press conference at the airport in Amman, and he said His Majesty and I agreed to disagree on the issue of Jerusalem. So that is a disagreement, and the nature of relations is that you agree and disagree. We are strategic partners. We disagreed on that, but we continue to work on the bigger and many other issues that we have in common between us. And again, that is doing a lot of good at bad times, unfortunately, in a troubled neighborhood. Our cooperation has contributed to addressing many of the challenges that we have in the region and beyond. The second question, I think. Look, sectarianism is extremely dangerous, and anybody who plays sectarian lines is toying with the future of the whole region. Ultimately, people go back to their limited, narrow identities when the overall general identity fails to provide the protection and guarantees and safety that people want. So we've seen that sectarian crisis developing in Iraq at a time when there was chaos and when the state could not provide the security it needed. So people went back to their narrow identities. Ultimately, in Jordan, obviously, we believe that there should be no discrimination on the basis of faith, color, religion, nationality. That is part of our constitution and part of our culture and part of our history as a country. So we continue to engage not only in interfaith dialogue, but His Majesty very early on, back in the early 2000s, has really made tremendous effort to bring all Muslim sects together with a view to build on that which is common and to respect that which is different, and to make sure that we do not allow sectarian division to spread, because it is a very dangerous threat that we cannot afford. Unfortunately, of course, you've got radicals who play that threat, who try to exaggerate it, try to create it. But ultimately, again, citizens should be treated based on their citizenship, not based on their color, faith, race, or whatever. And in Jordan, we continue to warn against that. And this has been a key pillar of His Majesty's efforts to bring about reconciliation within the region. So, and if you look at history, even look at Iraq, before the events of the last part of the last century, after the crisis, Iraqis, Shia and Sunni lived together in peace and harmony, intermarriages. People did not even ask what that is. So sectarianism was born out of conflict, was born out of the destruction of the national identity, was born out of the failure to build a good system of governance that provides equal treatment to all its citizens and does not discriminate against any of its citizens. That is something that we need to continue to work on. We need to continue to encourage not just interfaith dialogue among various religions, but also among various sects, because ultimately that which is common is way greater than that which is different. And sectarianism is always a function of politics that has been, as interfaith, as religious differences are, they get to be manipulated and exploited, and they thrive at times of despair and when there's not fairness and good governance and safety for all.
Thank you for that very, very strong statement. And I think that Liz is probably waiting for me to hand back to her. So I will end with a thank you to Your Excellency, and over to you, Liz.
Well, thank you both so much. That was an incredibly illuminating, good discussion, an excellent discussion. So thank you. And again, thank you to Steve and Baylor. We are really grateful for your support. So just a few reminders that if you want to catch up on any of our other programs, you can head over to our YouTube channel at dfwworld. And also, if you're not a member of us yet, we'd love to have you. Please join us, and I'd love to meet you in person when we start moving in that direction. And you can visit our website again for information on membership at dfwworld.org. And otherwise, thank you for joining us, and I wish all of you a wonderful day.